Welcome to Rich Baker and Friends. My name is Rich Baker, and my friend today is a world traveler, a man of 1,000 stories, and more. Geier, thank you so much for being on the show.
I am honored, Rich, and I hope I can share some great stories.
Yeah, so the reason I asked you, I mean, we could talk about a lot of things, you're a smart guy, but the reason I mainly wanted the show is because you have traveled to so many different places. You're a world traveler. You have been for a very long time. You've had a lot of different jobs in different cities. You've lived quite a life so far that's amassed a lot of anecdotes. So let me, when did you travel a lot as a kid and just keep that going, or was that a decision you made as an adult?
Well, aside from little short weekend vacations around Florida where I grew up, I hadn't traveled until my entire family, mom, dad, and brother, we all went to Europe for 3 months in 1968, the summer of 1968.
Wow, for 3 months, that's a heck of a trip.
My dad had written a book on life insurance for physicians.
Oh,
and
it's a real page turner.
Bucks on the book. It's a real page turner. It was important at the time, you know.
Of course.
He made a few bucks on the book, and my mom invested those few bucks in the market, and they made a few more bucks, and they decided to take the whole family to Europe, because my dad was originally from Europe, and show us Europe for 3 months.
Wow, and so where did you all go in Europe? What'd you see?
Well, first of all, we didn't go to Europe like normal people. We went on a ship.
Okay.
My dad was afraid of flying at the time, and we took a train to New York, stayed with some relatives on Long Island, and then got on the SS France, which at the time was the longest cruise ship on the planet, and spent a week going to Le Havre, France. We started there, then got on a train and went to Paris. And so we went to Paris, Cannes, Monaco, Venice, Italy, all the way down to Florence and Pisa and Rome. And I even went to Pompeii, which is the ruins covered by Mount Vesuvius eruption.
Yeah.
Hundreds of years ago.
Is that an island? Is Pompeii an island?
No, it's not. It's just south of Rome. It's about an hour train ride south of Rome. It was a resort area for wealthy Romans. And what was cool was the excavations were not very advanced. I went again in the mid-1980s, and it was like, oh, they've dug up everything, but they were just still making discoveries. So it was pretty cool. And then we continued on to Austria and Germany, and we went to Denmark and Holland. I think was our final, let me see, was it Holland? No, and then to England. And
were you a little kid when this was happening, or a teenager, or where were you at?
Yeah, I was like 12.
Okay, so old enough to like 12, enjoy some things, 12, but you're not going to nightclubs or anything.
No. Although one night, I remember in Paris, my parents left me and my brother alone in the hotel room and went to the Folies Bergère. And I remember my mom's comment about it, or it was my mom or my dad said it was like going to a dairy farm. It's a topless Parisian landmark.
All right.
It's like going to a dairy farm. So that was good.
That's not a glowing recommendation.
No, I think my dad enjoyed it a lot more than my mom enjoyed
it. That tests. I like that. So when you're 12, you get to see a whole big chunk of Europe, right? And did that kind of plant the seed for the travel bug that you still have to this day?
It did, and looking back, I realized that even when I was a little kid, like 6, my dad always promoted geography. My dad also was a world traveler in a different manner, than I. He traveled from Germany to America, but he was forced to do that, and then didn't travel until much later in life. But we used to play geography games, and he taught me latitude and longitude when I was like 7 years old. So it had been brewing there. But then that was my first big trip, and that really planted the seed till my next big trip.
And so was the next big trip another family thing, or was that on your own at that point?
It was in the summer after college.
Okay, so you went a decent time between big traveling.
Between big traveling, I suppose. Well, yeah. I mean, I was still in high school, and then after high school, I went to college. So there weren't any big trips in there.
Gotcha. And did you stay local in Florida for college?
Yes, I went to the University of Florida.
Okay, great.
For undergraduate.
Nice. And so you graduate college, and you're like, all right, I want to go somewhere again.
So I graduate college, and I really didn't know what I wanted to do. I ultimately ended up going to law school, but I didn't take the LSAT exam in college, and then moved right into law school. I took a year off in between because I really wasn't sure what I wanted to do, and then I took that LSAT during that year off.
Gotcha.
So I was back from Gainesville, Florida, at the time a small and still charming town in north central Florida, about 200 miles north of Orlando. Back staying with my mom in Miami at the house where I mostly grew up. And my mom says, "Look at this," and she's looking in the classifieds in the newspaper, because this was before there was Craigslist, right? People when they wanted to something, they put it in a classifieds.
Sure.
And she shows me this little clipping she clipped out, and it said writers, photographers, adventurers wanted for around the world cruise. And there was a phone number on it, and I could tell from the telephone exchange that it was very near my house in Miami. So I called up, and it turned out that this was a man who at the time was probably 64, 65, a self-made millionaire in commercial real estate in Miami in the 1940s, when Miami was really blowing up. And an avid boatsman and traveler. And he had the kind of a license that you need, a Coast Guard license, to take paying passengers on cruises like around the world. He knew boats.
Oh, wow.
And he had traveled with a younger fellow from Grenada who was essentially illiterate, except you could put a blindfold on this guy and he could tear a boat engine down to the bolts, clean it, and put it back together. He knew boats. And they had been to Papua New Guinea on small boats. He knew his stuff. So he, I told him who I was. He said, "Come on over." So I went over to his apartment, and there were maybe 4 other people, young people, college age or in their early to mid 20s, doing things, packing, and he was clearly packing for a huge trip. And he explained that his dream was to take an around the world cruise trip on a boat that he owned. Mm-hmm. And he had shopped internationally, and he had purchased in Sweden a small ship that was about 110 feet long, by about 30 feet wide, and I had maybe 8 decks, many of them below the water. The draw was maybe 23 feet, something like that. This is a major boat. It was a steel plate boat that had been built in 1800s and had been at that time had a steam engine, and it had a giant lighthouse protruding up from it, and its job was to go to a fixed location in the North Sea, sit at anchor, and be a floating navigation aid for ships. and it had been in the 1940s. The engines had been replaced with nice Swedish diesel engines, and then some salvage divers bought it. I mean, it wasn't fancy. It was a utilitarian. It was a utility ship, you know.
Yeah.
And they bought it, and they lost it to the bank in a repossession. And this guy bought it, and he flew me and 4 or 5 other people from Florida to Stockholm, and then we got on a train for 6 hours and went way north on the east coast of Sweden to a place called Sundsvall, which was only 65 miles south of the Arctic Circle. And there was this ship wharfed against the quay, you know, so you could just walk up the gangplank to get it in the bay, and the entire bay was frozen.
Oh, wow.
And this was April 15th. April 15th. Yeah.
Oh, nice.
So he took me along because I had a degree, my bachelor's degree was in journalism. And he wanted me to write press releases to mail, because there was no internet, you know, to mail back to the local newspaper in Hialeah, Florida, so he could garner publicity for what he was doing. You know, he just wanted to share what he was doing.
Wow.
And he gave me a little tiny piece of crap Smith Corona typewriter. And I had a tiny cabin, I would say, like, you know, about as big as your bathroom, I would say.
Yeah,
Rich,
so it's pretty,
you know,
you know,
where,
like,
you know, not too big. So I guess that would be maybe 20 feet by 10 feet, something like that, if you, whatever. Anyway,
yeah.
It was a small cabin with a little desk. But when I wasn't writing press releases, which was only once a week, I was chipping paint and painting. You know, I was doing like sailor grunt work on the ship. And that really had an interesting impact on me, because I was never raised to do much manual labor. You know, my dad, I remember one time when I was in maybe middle school, we were stopped at a stoplight in Miami. It had to be 98 degrees outside, and there was a work crew up on the roof of a nearby building. And my dad looked at him and he goes, "You see those guys?" And I said, "Yeah." He goes, "You can either work with your back or you can work with your brain." And so he didn't really emphasize a lot of labor. And here I am chipping paint. I mean, wearing mask and goggles, and it's cold. I'm out on the deck, chipping paint and repainting with lead. First, you had to paint with lead. The point is that I did manual labor, and I learned the how good it feels to do something menial, like painting a railing, but to do a good job.
Yeah.
So I got that lesson out.
That's really cool. So y'all, and you, how long were you out on this excursion with this guy you didn't know?
Yeah, right. Well, by then we were all pretty close friends.
Well, sure, yeah.
Yeah, I know, but I didn't know too much about him. It was a big leap of faith. I can see why he made a lot of money selling real estate. He sold himself pretty well.
Fair.
So the plan was to prepare the ship in Sweden, and then sail down through the Straits of Gibraltar, through the Mediterranean, through the Suez Canal, and onward around the world. We had a few problems. First of all of the equipment on the ship was labeled in Swedish.
Oh.
And not one of us spoke Swedish. So, for example, with this is an oldie time ship with one of those things where you push it forward and go, you know, you blow into the tube and it whistles and you go, full speed ahead, you know, wow. Reverse engine. You could not control the engine from the wheelhouse, which itself was sitting out. You had to go outside to get the wheelhouse. And you communicated with the engine room with with a tube that you spoke through, an old copper tube, and one of those full speed ahead, you know, forward reverse gizmos.
Wow.
And part of my job also was working in the engine room. We all did engine room shifts, and I learned about engines. And I mean, I'm no expert, but I learned a bit, you know. And I had to oil the engine and keep logs of records of of the fuel. We carried enough fuel to go 5,000 miles. So, and that's a lot of fuel. I believe it was 10,000 gallons of diesel.
Jeez.
We carried. So the people who previously owned the boat, the divers, they helped us learn how to operate the boat because we couldn't read it. And they were Swedish people, really nice people. And I remember I said once to one of them, his name was Mats Andersson. And I said, Mats, you know what I love is when Swedish people speak English, it's so sing-song. And he looked at me for a moment and he said, no, I don't think you're right. True story.
Oh, that's great. Wait.
True story.
So, so how long did it last?
So we spent a month getting the ship ready. We sailed to Dover, England, and then boom, there was the Suez Canal crisis. And what the Suez Canal crisis was, and I guess this was back in 1979, something like that. Okay. What the canal crisis was, Egypt closed the canal and wouldn't let any ships through. So now he was faced with this issue and wouldn't supply water or fuel. You know, does he get to the Suez Canal depleted, and he can't get through, and he can't get provisions? So the whole journey changed. It was right at that time in Dover, England, that I phoned my mother, who informed me that I had been accepted to law school.
Oh, wow, nice.
So now I had to make a choice, you know, and I decided not to blow off law school and in favor of a further adventure. And I left the ship, but I had 2 months to do whatever I wanted. I had all the things I owned in a big backpack because I was going to be on the ship for 2 years. I brought like 3 pairs of shoes, you know.
This thing was supposed to go for 2 years?
It was supposed to be a 2-year trip around the world.
Holy crap.
Yeah. So I left the ship and I backpacked around Europe. You know, this is again back in 1979, something, no, 77, something like that, when Europe was super cheap. I mean, going to Europe then was like going to Thailand now, you know, where you get there and you feel like, I got money to spend, you know.
The dollar was worth a lot of local currency.
The dollar was worth a lot of local currency.
Got it.
Europe still had a lot of charm. Now, mind you, I had seen it in 1968. So this is maybe 10 years later. Yeah. It hadn't become what it is now, which is pretty much, you know, every place is generic.
Oh, really?
With some, well, I mean, you know, there's McDonald's and Popeye's fried chicken. You know, there's all. It was very unique.
Gotcha. Still. Yeah. It had not been Americanized yet.
Yeah. And I had some. I had some amazing adventures on that backpack trip. And I have one in particular I think you would enjoy hearing if you want to continue with this thread.
Yeah, I mean, like, you know, as, you know, the internet came around when I was probably 12 or 13 and, you know, cell phones and everything. The idea of going to Europe by myself, you know, with just a backpack, even nowadays, that feels scary. Were you scared like something could happen and no one would ever hear from you again? You just disappear into the ether, or did that even factor into your brain?
No, never even crossed my mind. And the reason is it was a different world back then. I mean, I hitchhiked across Europe.
Wow.
And it was safe, relatively. I mean, there's always been some problems, but it wasn't the predatory world that we live in today, where you're constantly feeling like you got to watch your back.
Wow.
Yeah,
that's amazing. Yeah. So what happened on this trip?
So here's what was interesting. When I was working on the ship, I received $25 a week plus room and board, and whenever we would go out to a fancy restaurant, the captain always paid.
Nice.
So I had about $200 to my name. And I got off the ship, took the train, took the ferry to Belgium, went to Antwerp and Brussels, took the train. No, I think it was in Belgium that I purchased what's called an Interrail pass. We've all heard of Eurail pass, right?
No.
Okay, well, the Eurail pass.
Take for granted that I know almost nothing about traveling.
Okay, well, I will enlighten you. A Eurail pass is a pass where you pay one set fee, and then you can get on and off all the trains that in Europe, most of them, that participate at will.
Okay.
You know, and there are a lot of restrictions and times, and the ticket's good for this and not that, but basically that's the idea.
Got it.
An Interrail pass is that, but it was for people who were 23 years old or younger. Oh. And it included Morocco, which was great. So I went to the train, and you bought it from a lady at a table in the train station.
Okay.
So I went there. I think I have it, if you'd like to see it. But I went there. It's just a little card, and I bought the train. You could buy it for a month or 2 months.
Okay.
So I bought the train for the month. And I got on the train and I started my adventure. And I went from Paris. I was in Italy, and I went to Athens, and then took a ferry to Crete, and just had. That's a whole other interview.
Yeah.
But here's what happened. In order to make sure that I would be able to get back to the United States, before I started that journey, while I was in Paris, I purchased from a travel agent a return ticket from Brussels, Belgium to New York on a date certain. And it was a use it or lose it ticket. It was on a charter flight.
Okay.
So all I knew was I had to be in Brussels in about like 7 weeks.
Okay.
Right? And I had like $125 to spend. At the time, a youth hostel was $5 to stay in the youth hostel, or $3. You could do it. You could do it cheap. So off I go on this adventure, and I run into a tiny little snag, which is I'm in Greece, and my Eurail pass, my Interrail pass expired.
Nope.
And I have 2.5 weeks before I must be in Brussels.
Yeah.
Which is like a 2.5 day train ride, and I don't have the money to buy the train ticket.
Yeah.
And there are no ATMs.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
Right? So I did the only thing that I could do at the time, which was I call my mom, and she says she'll send me $200.
Oh, nice.
Nice. The problem is you have to wire that money.
Okay.
And it takes like 24 to 30 hours or something before the money gets to you. And you do it through a bank.
Okay.
So I was in a bank arranging all this, and I said it was clear from the conversation that the banker, who also understood English, was hearing between, from my end, my mom, that I was broke, and the banker loaned me $20.
Wow.
I didn't ask for it. He goes, here's this $20. And then when I got my money, I went to the bank and I gave back the money. The people were so super nice.
Wow.
So here I am. Now I've got a little money, and I'm in Greece, staying at the youth hostel, and I need to be able to get back to Brussels.
Sure.
So let me just, while I'm talking, I'm just looking. I have a box, and it's well, I would like to show you this pass, but I'll just describe it to you. Okay.
Later, you can shoot a picture of it. I can edit it.
Oh, that would be great. Okay. So basically, what the pass looked like, it was a little booklet, a little booklet, and on the front of the booklet, it had Interrail pass, and then it had written the date that the lady had written in with a pen, when you opened the booklet, there was a bunch of instructions in French that I couldn't understand.
Sure.
On the first 2 pages. And then the next page, on the left side of the page was a column, and it said from, and you filled out where you were at the time. And then on the right side, it said to, and you filled out in that column where you were going, so from Athens to Vienna.
Okay.
And then you got on the train, and when the conductor came around, the conductor would either put a rubber stamp on that line to indicate that you've used a ticket, or punch a hole with one of those hole punchers.
Yeah.
There, right. So I'm kind of thinking, wow, how am I? My mom wired me some money, but it wasn't enough money to make the train ride. So what am I gonna do? So I found a young lady I was talking to who was my age at the time, at the youth hostel, who had, of all things with her, Elmer's glue. Who travels with Elmer's glue? An American from Ohio. Who travels with Elmer's glue, right? This little booklet was just held together in the binding with 2 staples.
Yeah.
So I gingerly removed the staples. I cut out the instruction pages and the first few of my train journeys that had the date also next to the journeys. On the front of the booklet, the lady had written the date in a blue pen. I found a blue pen that matched the ink. And in Europe, when they write a 7, they write it like a 7, but then they put a line through the middle.
Mm-hmm.
And I extended the line around, and I turned the 7 into an 8.
Okay.
Which meant that my pass appeared to have been to expire 1 month later. Instead of expiring on July 18th, it expired on August 18th.
There you go.
The only problem was that if you really examine that booklet carefully, and if you were familiar with those booklets, as train conductors are,
sure,
when you opened it, you would see an irregularity in those first 2 pages. And they were out of place because I had removed pages.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So that's where I used the Elmer's glue. I very carefully glued those 2 pages together.
Oh, wow.
So that when you open the book, those pages were not there because they were glued, together.
And did it work?
You couldn't see. And what was important was if they had seen the dates on the previous travel, they would have realized that it exceeded 1 month.
Sure.
And I would have been busted, right? So now, and I know I've got 2 weeks, more than 2 weeks, I got to live off this little bit of money. So I went to a little market. I got a jar of peanut butter and a chunk of feta cheese and a loaf of, like baguette type of bread.
Mm-hmm.
And I picked a train that left at night because I wanted it to be dark. And I got on this train in Athens. Now, European trains, we have these cabin coaches. They look like a bus, basically, here in America. But there, you've seen them in movies, I'm sure. You walk down a narrow aisle and there's compartments, and you slide the compartment door open.
Oh, yeah.
Like on Murder on the Orient Express or something.
Yeah, I've seen those. Yeah.
Well, yeah. And then there's 2 bench seats, and then above the bench seats, there were luggage racks.
Okay.
So I got on the train. I was the only one in that compartment. And the first thing I did was I loosened the light bulb so the light switch wouldn't work. And I waited for the train to leave, and I stretched out on the seat, and sure enough, the conductor comes. Ticket. I think that's the only word in English he knew. Ticket. Maybe in Coca-Cola. I don't know. And I hand him this pass. He flips on the light, but the light doesn't work. Right? So he's looking at the pass, and it's kind of dim. And I'm thinking, all right, just be cool,
Yeah.
just don't blow it, and he pulls out a flashlight. And I'm thinking, this is not going to go well.
Right.
So he turns on the flashlight and looks at it, and he looks at it, and he looks at it. He turns off the flashlight and he hands it to me and exits.
Huh.
And I don't know if he thought that it was legit or if he realized it wasn't legit and he just either didn't want to hassle with it or, give the gringo a break or whatever.
Sure.
And I rode that train through the night until it got to the Austrian border.
Okay.
And when the train got to the Austrian border, it switched from being a Greek train to being a German company-run train.
Oh.
And the Germans caught me like that.
Yeah.
Right away. It was like, what is this with your pass?
Oh, wow.
And I'm like, so basically, I had ridden the train to Vienna, which was probably like a 20-hour, 18-hour train. It was a long ride, an expensive ride. It was the longest, most expensive part of the journey that I couldn't afford.
Mm-hmm.
And I got caught in Vienna, and I had to pay $20, depleting my money significantly.
Yeah.
And I'm in Vienna, and it's like 8 o'clock at night. So where am I going to go, So I go to the youth hostel. Now, the youth hostel was in a building that was probably built in the 1600s, a big, stone block building with huge wooden doors with massive door handles.
Real Game of Thrones. Yeah.
It was locked.
Oh.
Because it under the youth hostel rules, it closed at like 9 o'clock.
Okay.
And it took me by the time I got there, it was like 9:30. And I'm banging on the door with a giant knocker that looks like a lion,
Yeah.
Nothing. So all of a sudden, from about 2 floors up, a girl's head pops out of the window. And she says, and she's American, and she's speaking English, and she says, we're going to lower down a rope made of sheets, and we're going to pull you up. We're going to pull you up.
They didn't know you at all. They just were like...
It was the girls' dormitory side of the youth hostel because they're segregated, the men's side and women's side. So I'm like, okay, So first they lower down this rope made from like 8 sheets, bed sheets that they had tied together. And first I tie it on my backpack, but my backpack, no joke, weighed 70 pounds.
Wow.
I waited at the airport because I had all these things I owned.
Yeah, sure, of course.
And I was going to be a poor college student. I was like, I don't want to throw this stuff away.
Sure.
So these are my good hiking boots. So they had a hard time hauling that pack up. But they got it in the window. Then they lowered this sheet down to me, and I tied it around my waist. And most of the way I could climb on the cement, not the cement, but the stone blocks.
Got it. Okay.
They weren't that worried about burglary, back in the 1600s, because the penalty for burglary was, so nobody burgled. So it was easy to get in. But there was a space of about maybe 7 feet that there was nothing to hold on to. And they just hauled me in the window, and I flopped on the floor and thanked them, took my backpack, went over to the men's side of the dormitory, found a bunk, went to sleep. I think I probably took a shower, got up in the morning, had breakfast, which was included, and just left with the swarm of hostelers as they exited the youth hostel.
So you never officially checked in, you never paid for the hostel, you just strangers lowered a rope like strangers do. It's like, hey, we don't know you at all. You want up here? We'll spend 20 minutes tying bed sheets together. Like this is insane. This is the kind of thing that you would never think that would happen nowadays at all.
Well, here's an interesting side note. The bed sheets were already tied together because they'd already hauled someone else up that place.
Oh, you're the
I wasn't
second
the first
person.
one.
Yeah, you're not even original. You're like, oh yeah, we've already done this procedure. Just take the rope.
Oh my God.
That's
So
amazing.
now I'm in Vienna, right? And I've got about 10 days to kill, and I've got to get to Brussels, which is on the other side of Europe there,
Yeah, yeah.
because that was before when the Iron Curtain was still there,
Right, yeah, the
So
Cold War. Yeah.
there was yeah. So that was about as far east as you could go in Europe, almost. Yeah, because then more you'd be in Czechoslovakia, pretty much.
Oh, okay.
So I had to go to Brussels, which was completely on the other side of the continent. So I decided I'll hitchhike. Right now, I had purchased at some point a pair of lederhosen, just like from The Sound of Music.
Yeah.
The deer leather. I mean, I'm a vegan now, and it appalls me that I ever did that. But I had, with the straps like a Tyrolean, right?
Oh wow.
Now,
Okay.
and this is interesting because at the time, you have a passport.
Yeah.
People have passports.
Yeah.
They're little blue things. But at that time, the American passport was an oblong olive green,
Okay.
and it was very distinct. So I got out with my backpack on the Autobahn, and it's like going out on the 405, and I looked for U.S. service people cars. There's a lot of military on bases in Germany, and they had a distinct oval kind of greenish license tag, distinct from the regular license tag other cars had.
Mm-hmm.
And when I saw one of those cars coming toward me down the freeway, I just started dancing and waving my American passport, and I got rides out the wazoo.
Oh wow. Okay.
One ride I did get with a German industrialist in a Mercedes Benz like you don't see in America.
Okay.
Who took me for a while and dropped me. But I got a ride in a VW, like a microvan.
Mm-hmm.
But it wasn't decked out for camping, just a big van with 3 American service people. And they were going I was heading to Belgium and they were going somewhere else, but I rode with them till about dusk, just about sunset. And I said, and we were out in the middle of nowhere, I mean, pasture land, somewhere in Germany. I don't even know where. And so they let me off, and there was a huge pasture, and hundreds of yards down the pasture was a stand of trees. Like if you've ever seen cow pastures here, you often see that. They'll clear the pastureway and leave a big stand of trees. So I climbed through the barbed wire and started heading over towards this stand of trees because I was going to make a little campsite,
Sure.
And I got there. I didn't have a tent or anything. All I had a tarp, a small tarp, and a poncho. But it didn't look like it was going to rain, So I stretched out my sleeping bag, and I ran a rope between 2 trees and strung the tarp over it to make like a little flap. And as I put out my sleeping bag, a horse comes out of nowhere and grabs my sleeping bag in his mouth and starts bolting through the pasture. And I'm like, what? And so I start taking off after the sleeping bag, right? And the sleeping bag's trailing in the wind. And I don't know, I got to the point, horses have these weird eyes on the side of their head.
Right, yeah.
And I guess it could see me or something, and it stopped. And it dropped the sleeping bag. I took the sleeping bag, and I said, wow, that was just amazing, And I went back and I thought, well, you know what? I don't want to, sleep. I don't trust this horse. Okay, I never had.
Yeah, some other horse. I just don't trust it. I don't trust it.
I've never had like trust issues with equines or most animals except cats. I'm wary of cats. But I never had those kind of issues. But I don't trust this horse, and I'm not going to key up in this spot. So I picked myself up, and I moved much farther into the wooded area,
Mm-hmm.
and I set up my camp and my little bivouac there, and I went to sleep, and I woke up in the morning at dawn, and there was dew, little tiny drops of dew on every blade of grass.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw out of the corner of my eye some motion, and I looked over, and there were dozens of little brown bunnies munching on the grass. And I continued to gaze around, and I looked back to where I had originally been planning on camping.
Yeah.
It was covered with cattle.
Oh.
So I think this horse was trying to tell me that this was not a good place to camp.
Like a Disney character, like the horse is telling you something.
I don't know. You know what? I mean, maybe it's the spirit of one of my deceased relatives who perished in Germany. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is. But so I was very thankful to the horse, and I got back on the road. And it really renewed my faith in equities.
Thank goodness. I was shaky there for a night, but we got it back.
Yeah, the trust wavered a little bit, but yeah. So I got yada yada yada. I arrived now in Antwerp, Belgium, and I stayed. I remember I had gotten a ride with a long haul trucker.
Okay.
He dropped me in there, and I stayed at the youth hostel. I had all kinds of adventures. I'm leaving out all the womanizing that happened on this trip, because in case Disney wants to pick up this, for the Disney Plus channel or something. But
let's just be clear. Womanizing is a bad thing. You're talking about just like love trysts and encounters. You weren't like oppressing women.
Yeah, not oppressing women. I don't know how it's got that connotation. I mean, I'm talking about it in the context of the time, which was just like, flirting and hooking up, and
it was the hookup culture of the late 70s. Yeah, I got you.
Yeah, nearly getting thrown out of national parks. That just the kind of.
I just didn't want anyone watching this going, he's proud of womanizing. Well, it's like context.
It's interesting. I hadn't considered the connotation had changed, but
yes, I got you.
Like, thank you for setting everybody on the right course. So I'm leaving out all the fuck stories, is what I'm saying. Okay?
That's completely fair.
Can I say that on this podcast?
You can say whatever you want. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm leaving all those out, and just concentrating on the non-important parts of the trip. Sure. So I leave from Antwerp, and I get to Brussels, Belgium. Now I've got $30 left. $30, and I know from my reading in the Fodor's Guide to Europe that I'm going to need $20 to take the train from Brussels to the airport.
Oh, wow.
So I essentially have $10 of spending money, So I went to the Red Cross office, and I said, hey, I'm in this situation. And they said, we'll find you a place to live. They made a few calls. They gave me an address.
Oh, wow.
Rue des Champs-Germain, number 34 or whatever. I went there, and as near as I can tell, it was a halfway house, like for men out of prison or something. I don't know, because I couldn't communicate with anyone. Nobody spoke English, and I didn't speak French. And it had rooms with bunk beds. And I stayed there, and I cleaned and did dishes. Everybody did chores, and there was food. And I stayed there for 5 days and they took me. They all went downtown for the Belgian Independence Day, and it's like this whole big deal with fireworks shooting up off the ground and symphonic music and police Porsche 911 police cars, and it was a whole big deal. So now it's time to go home finally, right?
Yeah.
And at that time, you carried your money in traveler's checks.
Okay.
You didn't leave home without it.
Gotcha. Yeah.
And a traveler's check had 2 signatures on it, and they were both yours. One signature was you signed when you received the check,
okay,
and the other signature you signed when you used the check. And this was a security measure, so that whoever received the traveler's check, whoever received it, could look at it and see if it looked like you, if your signatures matched.
Makes sense.
And maybe they would look at your passport. So I go to the train station, and I got the $20 for the train fare, and I'm carrying my big backpack, that heavy backpack on my dominant arm, and I get to the window and I pull out the traveler's check and I sign it and I give it to her, and she looks at it and she goes, I'm like, I need this train or I missed the flight and I'm stuck in Europe penniless, right?
Right.
This thing, because I had that huge backpack on my shoulder.
It affected your signature.
It affected my signature. And so then she's got to get the manager, and sign other things. Meanwhile, tick tock, tick tock, tick tock. But in the end, they accepted it. I got on the train. I got to the airport. I'm home free, so I thought. Until I got to the counter to check in at the airport, where they demanded a $10 departure tax.
What?
I didn't have $10.
Ugh.
I did not have $10. I'm sorry. No, if you don't pay the departure tax, you can't get on the airplane.
Can't depart, yeah.
And then a woman standing behind me, German woman, tall, beautiful, said, Ivan pays this for you.
Wow.
And I said, no, Ivan pays this for you. I said, well, I will send it to you. No, don't worry. I'm going to New York for 7 months. Believe me, this is not a big deal. She paid my departure tax. I flew to New York. I landed at Kennedy Airport.
Mm-hmm.
I called my buddy Jimmy, collect. Jimmy's father, who was a really sweet guy and a playful ball, he liked to bust balls,
Yeah.
But in a, not in a mean way.
Right.
And he gave me crap about that for the next 20 years that I knew him when he was alive about, hey, Don, did you call collect? You can give me a call anytime, Don. Just, that's my real.
Oh, hang on, Breeze. Breeze, yeah, you're muted. Breeze, you're muted.
Had to drive out and pick me up because I didn't have cab fare, bus fare to get to where they lived on Long Island from JFK, and I got crap about that for a long time too. But here's the best part of the story. Many years later, decades later, I was in line at the airport. I think it might have been in Vietnam, just like 4 or 5 years ago. And there was someone in line ahead of me. Don't even remember if it was a man, woman, whatever. I don't know. Remember. Who didn't have the money to pay the departure tax.
Oh, wow.
And I paid the departure tax and felt like I paid it forward.
Close the circle.
And then I subjected that poor son of a bitch to the entire story of how I didn't have the money to pay the departure tax.
Amazing. So you had people give you rides, strangers give you rides when you hitchhiked. You had strangers use a rope for the second time to hoist you up into a hostel for free. You had a woman pay your tax. You had a horse, save you from a herd of cows. Like, you had a lot of really good, like a lot of European karma really went your way on this trip.
Yes, and I think that's a product of what Europe was at that time, 30 years ago or something, what it was at that time, and reflects what it is now, which is outside of big cities, which are predatory and so on. But in general, people are raised in Europe to believe that they're part of a larger picture, part of a larger society, and that there's benefit to being kind to others.
For what it's worth, this is total tangent, but I believe, I could be naive as hell, but I believe that we're on the precipice of a revolution to where that kind of mindset is going to start taking over again. Hopefully in America, but definitely I feel like I'm seeing seeds of people like, hey, let's all just like not hate each other, not rob from each other. Let's connect with each other, that kind of thing. I hope that's, some people call me a dreamer.
Well, you're not the only one.
Thanks, brother. You've had so many adventures, and we haven't even scratched surface. So we're gonna have to do this again, because we didn't even talk about any of your trips to Asia or Africa or any. You've got so many stories on stories. But thank you so much for sharing this. Is there anything you have that you want to plug, or anything that people can check you out on?
No, I'm in the process of building a website, but it's not up yet.
Okay.
I'm in the process of doing a bunch of things because I'm basically sitting indoors.
Sure.
And, like we all are. But no, the only thing I would say is, be kind to each other and say yes to adventures.
Well, that's the best plug I think I've had on the show so far. Breeze Geier, thank you so much for sharing some of your stories with us, and we'll have you on again, my friend. Thanks so much.
I got another great one for you about how I'm probably the only tourist who ever got a refund after getting ripped off in a jewelry store in Cairo, Egypt.
Wow. Well, we'll have to save that for next time. Good preview.
Great story.
All right, take care, my friend.
Thanks for having me, Rich.